Hello everyone, welcome to this video. In this video, we are going to talk about Spring Boot with GraphQL. So this is a tutorial for beginners where you will be learning so many things about GraphQL and how to make a project. At the end of this video, you will be able to answer most of the questions related to GraphQL and you will have a fair understanding of how the GraphQL works. Okay, so let's start with the agenda of this particular video, what we are going to discuss in these videos. So we'll be looking at what is GraphQL and we will be looking at the internal overview of how the GraphQL works. Okay. Then after that, we'll be looking at why do we need a GraphQL. So some of the advantages, why it is important and why do we use it. Along with that, we'll be looking at where we cannot use the GraphQL. And finally, we'll be closing up the session with a simple project to understand the GraphQL along with the Spring Boot and microservice. Okay. So with that, let's look at the definition of GraphQL. So what is a GraphQL? So basically, GraphQL is a query language for APIs. Okay, that allows the client to request exactly the data they need, nothing more or nothing less. Okay, so this is very important here, nothing more or nothing less. What it means is using the GraphQL, you will only get the data that you need. Unlike in the REST APIs, what happens, you create multiple endpoints and it will be giving you a particular set of data, even though you want it or don't want it. For example, let's take a example of an employee. So employee can have a name, ID, email, right? So when you request data using the REST API, you want the user details, you will be getting everything like a name, email, phone number, everything, right? So are you using all the data that you are getting in the form of an employee? No, right? So in the GraphQL, we only get the data that is required. In the GraphQL, we only have a single endpoint where the client has specify what they need. Okay, so let's look at more details onto it. Maybe a high level overview. Okay, so basically there are few components that are involved in making this GraphQL work. These components are basically a schema, the query execution engine, there will be a validation and the type checking, and finally there will be resolvers. So these components are basically supporting the GraphQL to work it efficiently. Okay. So what is a schema? So you can refer a schema as a file. Okay. This file will be looking something like this. And basically it will be having a type of objects like what is the data type, a string or integer, or if there are any enums like the one which is defined here. Now there will be queries into it. So the queries like what data you can read. So this is a type query. There is a get user, right? So what data you can read from the get user, that is provided in here. So there will be queries into this particular file that will be giving you exactly what you are going to read from this particular query. In this file, we will also be defining the mutation, like how we are going to modify the data into the schema, and the subscription, like how to listen to the real-time events. Okay, so these all things will be there. Okay, so the step one, you can think it of as client sends a query. So your query will be something like this, where you will be specifying this get user. It is the ID that you are providing in the argument, the ID with one, and what you want the name and the email. Okay. What will happen? The GraphQL server will receive the query. Okay. And it receives in the JSON format, then extract the query and the variables. Okay. Next, what's going to happen? So there will be a validation phase after that, wherein if every query goes through a syntax validation, wherein it will be checking this query if it is written correctly. Then there will be a schema validation. Here is the query which is having a get user. So if it is written correctly or not, that will be validated. There will be a schema validation. So this is our schema. Okay. So this schema basically it will be validating if there is a get user into that or not. So yeah, there is a get user here. And what about the argument that we have passed in here? Yeah, that is also there. So these all things will be validated. Then only it will be allowed to move forward. The step 4 will be the execution phase, wherein the GraphQL parses the query into an abstract syntax tree. Okay. You can think it as breaking the sentences into a grammatical parts. Okay. So this execution engine works through the ATS field by field, okay, and it will be calling the resolver function. Each resolver knows how to fetch the data from that field. So this is a very high level overview. If you don't understand it, that's okay. It's just for the theoretical part. When we are going to do the practicals, you will be having a much clear picture of what's happening here. Okay. So why do we need a GraphQL? So it's quite very straightforward. It fetches exactly what you need. Okay. No underfetching or no overfetching. You will get what you need. Okay. In the rest, each endpoint returns a fixed data structure. There can be unnecessary data that can be, you can say it as a overfetching, or there will be a missing fields that require additional request that will be underfetching, right? So the GraphQL allows the client to request only the data that they need. Okay. For example, in the REST request, you will be having a get user slash one might return you the extra fields which you don't need. The example which I gave right for employees, if you don't need a phone number, why do you need a phone number? But in the GraphQL, what happens? User you define along with that you what you want the ID and the name. So it gets you only the ID and the name. In the GraphQL, there is a single endpoint instead of multiple endpoints. Okay, so in REST, what will happen? See, there will be multiple endpoints in your controller. It's a get users, get user by ID, get the user post by ID. But in the GraphQL, there will be only one endpoint that will be slash GraphQL, and you will specify exactly what you need. Okay, so that brings us to the advantage that there will be reduced number of API calls. So get related data in one request to get the user and their post. So in the rest to get the user and their post, you may need to call two APIs, that is the get user and the get user post by the ID. But in the GraphQL, you have a single query which does it all. So in the user, you need to mention the what you need the ID and the name, and also you need the post. So in the post, what you need the title and the content, right? Only this much you want and this much you will get. So the GraphQL is basically, you can say, as a strongly typed query, and it provides us with the better validation and documentation. So there will be a schema, right, in the GraphQL. When you define the schema, it will be having a clear types like user, post. It's a self-documented kind of a query. So the client here exactly knows what data is available and how to request it. Okay. So GraphQL is better for microservices and aggregation because the GraphQL can combine the data from multiple microservices into a single response. For example, fetch user details from user service and order from order service in one request. Okay, so that does the aggregation for us, and it's best for microservices. Okay, so that brings us, so we'll be going to make a project that will be with Spring Boot using GraphQL, and we'll be using the S2 database for a user storage, and we'll be using the IntelliJ, and along with that we'll be using a Maven build. So we'll be having a POM XML files and all. Project will be having a user. It will be having user details, and along with that it will be having user post. Okay. After making this project, we'll be also testing this particular request using the Postman. How do we test it? Okay, so let's move to the project and get our hands dirty.